It's my pleasure to introduce this morning's keynote, Abi Nemani, who became the first Chief Data Officer for the City of Los Angeles in September of 2014. He is a former Code for America co-director who led the organization's strategic development and growth through multiple new programs, including the launch of a first-of-its-kind civic startup accelerator and the Code for America Peer Network, designed to connect cities to help them work together. Please join me in welcoming Abi Nemani.
Thanks, Father. So is this working? Yeah? Okay, great. Good morning. How's everyone doing? Friday morning. I'm impressed that there's this much turnout. That's not bad. I'm excited to be here. Actually, just as a bit of background, I got my start in local government technology at NAGW. Actually, I'm not going to tell you what year, because that would tell you my age. But it was in St. Louis, the first time I actually ever interacted. Yeah, so now you know my age. She just figured it out. She just figured it out. It was the first time I actually interacted with government technology, and I got a chance to spend some time with you all and your colleagues, and it's been my career ever since. And most recently, I was the Chief Data Officer for the City of Los Angeles, spending some time working in open data and on data science. And so today, now I'm fortunately out of that job. Fortunately is the wrong word. I've moved on, so I'm going to be a little provocative, if that's okay. I know it's early, so sorry. But let me give you some background. So I started the City of Los Angeles last September. And when I was there, they had actually already started the open data program before I was even there. So I inherited it. And as a conscientious, thoughtful guy, I spent some time asking people, all right, what works, what doesn't work? This was the original data.lacity.org. And the interesting thing I found out from every conversation was this question: what is data? It was funny, actually. The assistant in our office, she knew I took this job and started doing this work around data. And she's like, Abi, I went to the data portal and I don't actually know what data is. And so then I spent some time then rethinking how to visualize and present data. So this is the new data.lacity.org. And the interesting thing about it is actually this. I didn't plan on those animations, by the way. When we redesigned the data portal to make it a little bit more engaging, we put the map right up front, we made it more compelling, the bounce rate went from 50% to 5%. And we had 4x increase in user traffic in about 2 months. Yeah. So that would make you think that I'm going to hear and talk to you about data portals and why we should have them and why they're great and how to make them better. In fact, that's not at all what I'm going to tell you. I actually think it's time we abandon data portals altogether. How many folks here have governments that have data programs and open data portals? So sorry. This is going to be a little awkward. But have some more coffee and then. But I think there's a couple of key trends, profound shifts happening in the tech industry in general and in government technology as well, that I think that forces us really to rethink the way we approach data. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So trend one, we're moving from data to delivery. And my friend Aaron Ogle is here from the city of Philadelphia, and he's actually working on delivery system, so he can talk to you about that as well. But so let's just walk through a little bit of history here. So again, the open data and the government innovation space has been happening for a long time. Again, you know my age now. What's interesting about it is I think there's been a pretty interesting and profound shift in the way that it's working. So let's step back to about 2008, right? there's a Sunlight Foundation, right, that did a lot of great work around opening up data, right? Lots of FOIA requests, which now I've had to deal with, so I can tell you that that's a pain, as you all know. But it was really a focus on getting the data from government, right? So that was step one, I think, right, is open data for the sake of open data. And really the premise there was that more data and more transparency would lead to better accountability. That was the fundamental premise. So that was 2008. Things started to change a little bit, and then we started to move into this idea of civic engagement, right? Using technology for engagement, and Aaron's laughing here because he worked on this project and didn't like it. But we started to think about, okay, so we're seeing the way people engage with apps differently, right? Engaging with the web differently. Can we use that to engage people with government differently? I'll be honest, most of these efforts have failed. This one, famously so. But we can talk about that in the questions if you want. So that was step two, right? So we went from open data for accountability to citizen engagement. And now I think we're finally moving into this area of digital transformation, of using technology to actually change the way we do service delivery. And this is an example from the UK, and I know Tim was here the other day and spoke about this a little bit as well, but what they're doing is they're taking every key interaction that people have with government and saying, all right, how do we make that digital? And that's where we're going to now. And the interesting thing about that is actually that leads to better data, right? Because right now we're basically transcribing information from paper forms. Right now it takes 16 months to get police records for the city of Los Angeles. 16 months. Because we have to send it to the state, they have to transcribe them, and then send them back. So that's not the right way to handle open data. That's not the right way to do it. And instead, if you pick a digital first strategy, you actually get better data through it. And what's interesting about it is we kind of went the wrong way. We started with open data, citizen engagement, and service delivery. The UK did the exact opposite. And the best example of this is this guy, Mike Bracken, was the head of digital services for the UK, and now he's the chief data officer. So just think about that shift, right? He became the chief data officer after doing digital services for 3 years. And that, to me, is really the right way to approach this. So that's trend one, right? Is this movement from data to services. Trend two is from one app to many apps. So we all remember the time when you'd have just Facebook or whatever, and you'd use that one app all the time. That's changing now. There's a really smart venture capitalist named Mary Meeker, and she writes these internet trends every year. And last year, her trend that she spoke to was this idea that the web is splintering. So instead of just having one app to do everything, you in fact have multiple apps. So a good example of this is Foursquare. So Foursquare beforehand, you do everything in one app. Now there's Foursquare and Swarm. Facebook has Messenger as a separate app. Google has 17 different apps, right? So you're seeing the shift from just one specific application that does everything to many different applications focused on a particular experience, right? So you're focusing on good user experience and building applications just for that. So that's trend two. And then trend three is this notion of an architecture participation. And again, if Tim talked about this yesterday, then stop me right now. No? Okay. So what I like about this idea is that when you create web applications and create user experiences, you have the opportunity to get people to do more, right? You can upsell them, right? And we all know this, right? You see it every day when you go to Amazon. So this is my favorite book, Democracy in America. When you're buying a book at Amazon, they ask you, customers also bought, right? They're upselling you, right? They're asking you to do more, right? Of course, we see this in the grocery store all the time. But I think the interesting question is, how do we create civic upsells, right? How do we get more people to do stuff with government using the digital interfaces that we create? And again, I keep talking about the UK, which I don't know why, but they have a really great example of this. So they call tax payments task discs. I don't know why. So they built this page to let people pay for their taxes. But they did something really interesting. On the thank you page, so after you finish it out, they let you ask if you want to donate your organs. We'll put all that aside. What's interesting about it, though, is they did A/B testing on it. They tested to see what would be the best way to actually design that page. So they had a lot of different variations, one with some ridiculous stock photo image, but different ones. And here's what's crazy about it, though. They got 350,000 people to commit to donating their organs because of that one page. Wow. 350,000 people, just by changing the way that page looked. So that's point 3, I think, is that you're seeing a movement towards engaging people in higher levels over time, right? So 1, you're seeing a movement from data to delivery. 2, you're seeing the web start to splinter, start to become multiple different applications. And 3, you're starting to see levels of engagement increasing. You're starting to see architectures of participation. So now you're thinking, Abi, you're going to tell me that we should abandon data portals. How does this make sense? You're just talking about data, or you're talking about digital services. Well, I think the reason, the core notion is this, that we're moving from an idea of portals that solve every problem for every person to people. We're moving to user-centric design. And I think we have to do the same thing for data. Because we're doing it in the private sector already, we're just not doing it when we think about data. So that's the core notion here, is that we have to move away from the idea of portals and think more about people, away from unified platforms and more towards user-centric design. So then, what do we do with data? So first and foremost, I think you have to go where people are. And so here's an example so you guys have probably seen these before. They're usually hidden in the back of the restaurant. It's a restaurant inspection score that no one ever pays attention to or sees. Of course, you'd probably like to know that before you go to the restaurant. So we did a project when I was at Code for America to change that. To change having this data that was hidden in the back of the restaurant or hidden on some government website that no one would see, and put it in the palm of your hand. And so we put it on Yelp. So now on Yelp in most major American cities, you actually can get restaurant inspection scores and find it right there. This is sad because this is one of my favorite restaurants in San Francisco. This is probably why I left San Francisco. 78, not that good. So you're starting to see that data get incorporated in consumer platforms. We did a similar project with Trulia, getting building inspection data, publishing that directly to the app, so that way you can find that before you're picking an apartment. And so then most recently, though, in LA, we did a project with Waze, where we actually gave them the data around street closures, right? So how many of you guys have been to LA before? Traffic is a little bit of a problem there. Maybe. This is why I gave up my car. But so the city, as you guys all know, right, we have information about street closures, right? Public events that are happening, they're going to stop traffic. Well, beforehand, we kept all that data to ourselves. Now, we actually give that directly away so they can reroute people dynamically beforehand. So that itself is interesting. That's a good open data story. But here's, I think, what's more interesting is that Waze is actually doing something for the city in return. So anytime there's a kidnapping or a hit and run, Waze will tell the users saying, this just happened, do you have any data? Right? So anytime that there's a kidnapping on Wilshire, right, Waze will actually ping you and say, hey, do you know what's going on? Have you seen anybody? Do you know what's happening? And this is what I think is interesting. This is how the police reported it. I'm sorry, the news reported it, that this is a gift to law enforcement. So think about that. Often when we think about open data and data around crime, it's usually negative. Right? It's usually not positive. In this case, it was actually a gift to law enforcement. So you're seeing a pretty profound shift. So that's one. Two, I think we have to start thinking about data as content, right? And again, we're talking to webmasters here, so you guys all know this well. So anyone want to guess what the most popular data set for the city of Los Angeles is?
Ours.
Sorry?
Employee salary?
Nope. Nope.
1 year's water a month?
You're not allowed to do that anymore, actually. That's a law, actually. To be fair, it is actually a law. Nope. It's immigration workshops. And this is why. We embedded on the mayor's website all of the immigration workshops that are happening within the city. And that means a lot more people are seeing it than who go to data.lacity.org, right? So the most popular data set is immigration workshops. And to be fair, in Los Angeles, it's a huge issue, so it makes sense. But that's the most popular data set. And I think that's something we have to think about more, is how do we, instead of just having the data on the fringes on its own data portal, how do we incorporate it into the city website itself? Are any of you guys doing that now? Like embedding open data sets onto the city websites? Or local government websites? Yeah? Yeah? That's good. I think that's going to be the really big shift in getting people to actually see the data and use the data. And then the other thing is, I think we have to think about different kinds of data. And this, I'll be honest, this is probably my biggest learning and the biggest thing that I found out when I was in the city, is that there are very different kinds of data, and we have to think about them in distinct ways. So when I started, this was the dashboard that the city had. This was the Socrata dashboard that the city deployed back in May of last year. So no one used it. Literally, user traffic was about 10 or so people a month. And I was probably most of them. So this is the dashboard we built beforehand. And it just didn't solve any real problem. It didn't do anything that we needed to do. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about this. And this is my strategy that I developed on literally a cocktail napkin. That there are these three different kinds of data that we have to think about. And the problem with the dashboard that we had beforehand is it didn't actually speak to any of the three. So let me just walk through these three different kinds. So operational data. So this is like all the 301 calls that come in, right? So this is useful for maybe a manager. It's useful to track how things are going, but it's not actually effective from a performance standpoint, which is the second kind of data, which is performance metrics. How many governments here have performance management groups? Yeah. So we had a performance management group that's literally spends, let's see, it's 50 metrics per department, and the city of Los Angeles has 44 departments. Yeah. So they're tracking that. But there's a distinction, right, between performance metrics and operational data, right? So operational data, again, is all the 301 calls. Performance metrics is the wait time, right? And that's different, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But then of course there's a higher level metric as well that is harder to track, and frankly local governments at least don't track this stuff that well, which is quality of life, right? How are people doing in the city? How are things for regular people, right? Santa Monica is probably the best example. They have a great quality of life program where they track that. It's funded by Bloomberg. But most cities don't track that. But again, the point here is that there's these three different kinds of data, right? And we have to think about how we visualize and manage against those different kinds of data, right? So operational data makes tons of sense to put on an open data portal if you're going to keep that, but you all are not going to anymore, right? Yeah, okay. Performance metrics is a different kind of thing to track, right? And then quality of life, I mean, if you guys have ideas of how to track that well and how to visualize that, I would love to know. But so based on this idea that there's these three different kinds, and of course the sweet spot is where you can find all three connecting, right? But that's great, but often you can't do that, right? So instead what we did in LA is we focused on performance metrics, and specifically with a particular user in mind, which was our mayor. So I asked myself the question, what does the mayor need to see and what does he want to do? And built a dashboard for him specifically with that in mind. And this is what it looks like. So it's lamayor.org/dashboard if you want to check it out. Two interesting things about it. So one, he checks it religiously, which scares me sometimes. But he checks it very often. But the other thing is, so if you notice these, I call them metric cards at the bottom here, those aren't driven by the open data portal. Most people wanted me to make it tied to the data portal. We decidedly didn't. Instead, all of that data comes from Google Docs. So literally staffers update these Google Docs on a monthly basis, and those populate directly onto here. It's actually a really nice piece of code if you want to check it out. It's on GitHub. But the reason we did that was mostly that we wanted to have accountability, right? So if the data was coming straight from the from the open data portal, the departments could say, well, that data is dirty, that data isn't clean, right? Well, when the general manager has to update that number, and he knows or she knows that the mayor is going to be looking at that every day, 4 to 5 times a day, they have accountability, right? And that was the shift that we made. Instead of using that other dashboard that we had beforehand that was all dynamically driven, this was about people having to say what their numbers are and reporting those to the mayor directly. Again, it's all open source, so check it out. You can use it. About 10 or so other cities are thinking about redeploying this. So then, okay, so you want to get the data in regular people's hands and using apps that they like. You want to start building different data experiences. But at the end of the day, the only way to get value out of data is to get out there. How many of you folks have hackathons in their jurisdictions? Aaron, put your hand up. Philadelphia has way too many. So, interesting thing that I learned when I was in LA is that there was a lot of different groups doing interesting work, doing civic-related work. No one was talking to each other. Like literally for the first 3 months, I had the same conversation about 20 different times. Because you had these different groups all doing their own thing independently. And so what I decided to do there was very deeply commit to actually bringing these groups together, having them all start to talk to each other. And so we launched a program called Tech LA. We've had Woot, the biggest hackathon 2 years in a row. Again, Aaron, deal with that. But the idea was that actually just by building a brand, right, just this identity, Tech LA, it actually helped these different groups come together in a way that they couldn't have done on their own. And that's one of the core responsibilities and opportunities that we have as government officials, is that we actually can build the tent, right? We can actually have people come together. And here's an example from the Tech LA event last year. They built an app that helped people find homeless shelters, and all the kids were in high school. So you're seeing people do really remarkable and special things. But so again, I'm sure we can talk on and on about hackathons and app competitions and how to make those great. Those aren't sustainable, right? So you can have one great event. This is a great event. You can have another great event. But then what happens after that? People go home. They go back to their lives, right? So the hard question is, how do you create staying power? How do you get people to come together on and on? How do you create infrastructure that lets people actually do meaningful work in an ongoing way? So we did that. So borrowing a little bit from a model in Chicago. Chicago has a great organization called the Smart Chicago Collaborative. They do fantastic work. They're kind of the staying power in Chicago. They provide fellowships. They help people take apps that they've built at a hackathon and make them into businesses. So we built the same thing in LA. It's called compiler.la. It's actually a for-profit that actually works on civic issues, but they commit 20% of all of their revenue back to the community to build the civic tech ecosystem. So they'll get contracts from foundations, from cities, and then they use part of that money to then go back and help build the civic tech community. That, to me, is the kind of staying power that we need to have. So I'm realizing that he wanted me to talk for 75 minutes, and it's probably not going to happen. So bringing that all together, there's a great book called Small Pieces Loosely Joined. Has anyone read that? It's about the web. And it's about how the web is, to use Dave as the author, to use his phrase, he says the web is perfectly broken. Which I think is an interesting phrase, perfectly broken. Because it's messy deliberately, right? And he had this great phrase, there's something pulling us to the web is ours. The web is ours in the same way that language is, it is us. And bringing this all back then to data and open data portals, it's hard to follow that up by talking about data portals, but I think we too often think about building that one great portal, that one great experience. But what we've learned from the web is that actually we should make it diffuse. We should do lots of different things and not just build one experience. And instead, think about building the exact experience for the one user you have, be it the mayor, be it the citizen, be it whoever. All right, thank you. I can now tell you funny stories about Aaron, if you want.
Of course.
Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? Hello? Wow. There we go.
Need that?
Yeah.
Loud. Jack Horner, Matsuburgo, Alaska.
I can hear you fine.
Yeah. So I'm actually kind of just curious about the mayor's dashboard that you put together.
Yep.
With our organization, that would be a single report delivered to the mayor. Nobody else gets to see it. I applaud the idea that it's out there and available, and the thing that he looks at can be seen by anybody and everybody. Were there issues with just making that freely available? If so, could you talk about them?
Yeah. So initially, it was actually just private. So initially, it was just for the mayor. For about 3 months, it was that, just literally behind a firewall. Though the mayor, and I applaud him for this, he has a belief that anything he sees, the public should see. And so we opened it up and made it publicly available as well. I'll be totally honest though, because we're among friends here, I coded the whole thing on GitHub and put it on GitHub pages, so the whole thing was public the whole time, just no one knew that, because no one knows how GitHub pages works. By the way, that's like one of the biggest tricks that I've learned is anything I wanted to do, I just put on GitHub pages and it's just online. Oh, it's a GitHub link. No one knows what that is. But the other thing is, there was some questions around what to publish and if it was appropriate to publish it or not. We just worked through it. The interesting thing is, and actually if I had internet, I'd show you. The cool thing that happened was, so we launched the thing publicly in like May, I think. And beforehand, it just had kind of key operational metrics for the different departments. The mayor then started asking questions like, well, what's going on with homelessness in the city? What's going on with poverty in the city? And so we started creating focus area dashboards on top of that, which is interesting as well, just to, just now I'm out of the role so I can speak very freely. It's a really helpful way to get close to the executive, because literally I basically had a direct line into him, right? Because he would pull this thing up all the time. I made a joke every now and then that I should just like start texting him in there and just he could check that out. But it is a really helpful way to actually enamor yourself as a data officer or as a webmaster with the executive by building them a tool that they specifically need and use.
Cool. Any other questions?
Oh, sure.
First off, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. I stumbled backwards into upselling just in this recent web development project I've been doing. I referred to it as selling more pizzas, because before I was a government guy, I delivered pizzas, and we had this app called Sell More Pizzas, and it's like, oh, this guy usually orders breadsticks. One thing that I would encourage or ask or get down on my knees and beg, a lot of us smaller cities, like I work for Tacoma Park, Maryland. We're right next door to DC, but we're only 17,000 people, and we have the budget of a city that has 17,000 people. We desperately want to do things like upsell, but we need a big brother to do that. So giving us the knowledge and the support or just a roadmap of how to do this on a smaller scale would be wonderful. I think there are other people in the room that would encourage and welcome that.
So, totally. So by the way, I'm from Centralia, Illinois. It's 10,000 people. So I worked for a big city in the past and lived in San Francisco before that. So I have a big city pedigree, it sounds like, but I'm really not. I mean, I'm from a small Midwest town. And so when I think about this stuff, when I think about the hard questions that we have to answer, it's not how we do civic innovation in New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco. It's how we do it in, what was your town?
Tacoma Park.
Tacoma Park, right? It's how we do it in Centralia. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I wrote a blog post that I can pull up if you want, called Small City Pieces Loosely Joined, thinking specifically about that question. How do you build civic technology that works for smaller cities? And I actually think the strategy there is, again, less about building one app that does everything and instead using lots of different apps, right? So take Chicago, for example, right? So Chicago, and again, it's a big city, so I apologize, but they have lots of different applications that solve the key problem that they have. So See-Click-Fix does potholes, Purple Binder does 2-on-1 discovery, they have a service tracker app that actually we built when we were at Code for America. They have a lot of different apps. And actually one thing that I did, and I can send you the link if you want, I put together a simple site that lets you track all of those apps for a city, and you can have like a simple one-page mobile website that actually links all those together. It's citydigitalservices.com if you want to check it out. But the idea is basically that, is how do we start connecting the dots between these different applications and stop thinking about building one huge application that does everything, and instead leverage lots of different pieces. Because, I mean, my city of Centralia, I think their IT budget is probably $50K, right? So there's no way that they could build a huge open data portal. By the way, do you guys know how much we spend on Socrata every year? Anyone want to guess? $360,000.
It'll get there when you add more data.
Hey, 400 data sets, all right? I'm doing all right. But yeah, no, I mean, that's not tenable, right? And so we have to move into a different worldview, right, that doesn't cost $1 million to host 400 data sets.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Hi, Rob Mullen from City of Kirkland, Washington. I kind of want to just want more clarification on sort of your view of sort of portals. I know the whole distributed web, you're saying more little pieces versus big pieces. But in some cases, I find that kind of at odds with the concept. I sort of want to I want you to clarify, just like, when you're talking about portals, you're talking about these sort of dumb repositories where these things sit, not so much like on your Venn diagram there, where the middle part between the three things that you want. I just kind of want a little more sort of clarification on that piece of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm speaking specifically to this kind of obsession that we all have around building the data.city or state.
Yes, the everything.
Yeah, building that. I think that's not where we should be spending our time and focusing our efforts, right? I think instead it's about integrating it with Yelp, right? Integrating with Waze, or figuring out a new crazy thing. I'd love to figure out the next new interesting interaction or integration with data and consumer sector. A friend of mine, Nick Grossman, had a nice phrase. He said, instead of building new civic apps, we should make all apps more civic. And I think that's the point I'm trying to get across. Does that make sense?
Anybody else? I think that's it, Abby.
All right.
Oh, we got one?
Oh, please.
Don't bring it over. I really
Go on ahead, Jack.
Okay, so integrating with things like Yelp, et cetera.
Yep.
Once again, I see that very easily for LA, but Podunk, Alaska, I don't see that happening. Any suggestions on where to go, what to do?
Totally. I mean, so that's a really hard question, right? But I think that's what this conference can do, right? Because you can have collective bargaining power effectively, right? So yeah, so Centralia, Podunk, Alaska, all these other cities on their own probably couldn't get Yelp's attention, right? All together, you totally could, right? It's totally doable, right? But it just requires networking, interactions, and leverage from a larger group of cities. That's actually how we got Yelp to do the thing anyway, is that we had 5 or 6 different cities saying that they're going to open up their data and release it in this common format. And then they were able to integrate it, which, I'll be honest, it was not an easy sell. I mean, it took a long time.
Easy sell to Yelp, not an easy sell to the cities.
The cities were easier. It was Yelp that was harder to sell because, their clients are the restaurants, right? So getting them to say bad things about the restaurants was a little bit tricky. But again, because we had we had 6 or 7 different cities and bigger ones. So again, I realize it's going a little against the point, but we had multiple cities saying that they were willing to open up this data and integrate it. And honestly, it just became a good PR story for them, right? And I think there's huge opportunities for that, right? I mean, think about Airbnb and Uber. Like, there's all these companies that are spending a lot of money and getting a lot of revenue from our cities, right? Why don't we have them give something back? But again, Centralia is not going to be able to do it on its own. Podunk, Alaska won't be able to do it on its own. But together, right, if we're able to get a consensus among a number of jurisdictions, that's a huge bat and ball.
I can talk loud.
I can hear you fine.
I'm Paulette, I'm from Thornton, Colorado. And it sounds to me like what you're saying is basically what we need to look at our data sets and say, why do people care?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Can I just give you my candid answer?
Yeah.
I don't-
I didn't want a candid answer when I asked.
I don't think people do care. I really don't. I mean, I think the stuff that people do care about is how to get to work on time, right? What the weather is like, you know.
But when we're looking at the portal with just the lists of all of our data sets, somebody cares or it wouldn't be available.
Yeah, I don't know if I buy that.
Somebody on council cares, but somebody on council cares.
Yeah, there you go. Someone in council cares.
But they-
Or the LA Times cares.
Somebody asked them somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think,
We need to figure out what that root cause of somebody asking for this data is, and then we need to take it to where those people are, not where the council member is.
yeah, I think that's dead on. I mean, but I think the hard question is figuring out what are the data sets that people really care about, like real people, right, not the council member. And you know, again, that's why the immigration data set is the most popular, right? Because that's what people care about, right? You have, Los Angeles has 500,000 people affected by immigration reform. 500,000 people. So yeah, that's an important data set to them, right? All the street cleaning information, maybe not as important to those folks, right? Though that is important too. But I think you're dead on. I mean, we have to think about what are the core use cases, right? What are people trying to do with data, and then figure out how to deliver that.
Abi.
Go,
Hi.
Aaron.
So great presentation, as always. You're very articulate. So two-part question. The first being, there are a lot of people here who are working on city websites, municipal websites. From your perspective as a chief data officer, what is kind of the one thing you would like us to take away and to think about? And secondly, 1 year as chief data officer, what do you wish you had known a year ago?
Well, all right, I'll get to the second one in a minute. But so I think the biggest thing is, so if I were like wave a magic wand, right, I would bring together the chief technology officer, the chief data officer, and what should be like a chief communications officer, or basically the head of digital, into one role, right? Because I don't think it makes sense to have them separate. And I think the biggest takeaway I would have for you guys is building websites for government is don't just put data on the side. Incorporate data directly into the website, right? And to be fair, I mean, all the content you're putting on the website already is kind of data, right? So the idea of having a separate data portal that you have the statistics on doesn't make sense. Like, you should actually just incorporate directly into the website, right? And again, that's, I keep using the immigration story, but that's why we got so many users seeing that data set, is because we incorporated it directly onto the mayor's website. So that'd be my biggest, I guess, point. What I wish I knew, oh, that's hard. I wish I realized how important stories are. That, and it's funny coming from Code for America, because that's what we did a lot of. But I didn't realize how much politics is politics, right? So how much the narrative that the city needed to have mattered, right? If I knew that from the get-go, I probably would have done things a little differently. But I think that's, for anybody working in a political office or in an elected office, you probably know that that's true. You've seen that before, the council member telling you what to do. But I think that was one big thing. And the other big thing, and actually, you know, to your first point, your first question, The other big thing that I realized I wish I knew more was how important training is. So I was a one-man shop, like just me, trying to do data for a city of 44,000 employees, and what is it, 4 million people? That doesn't work. And I'm sure you all have the same problems around budget constraints, around staffing issues. What I wish I had done better is start to build an army, right? So recruit people, train them, get them savvy. Because again, a lot of the data stuff that we're talking about, particularly on the data science side, you can do with Excel, right? But it just requires people to know how to do a macro, right? Which you can train them. It takes a couple of hours. So I think that would be the other big thing I would have done from the get-go is build that army.
Cool. Any other questions? All right. Abi, thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.